everyone, it's Lexi, and today I'm going to be sharing with you all the books that I read in the month of January, so without further ado, let's get started. And before I begin, I did just post a video on starting a potential book club, so please go check it out. I will link it down below, and if I can figure out how to do these suggestion things up here, then or if it's here, I don't know. But if I can figure it out, if you're interested in maybe doing like starting a book club on this channel, please let me know. I'll link the video somewhere. But if you're interested, please let me know in the comments and like potential names and stuff. I'll probably aim to have it started in March because February is going to be a heck of a crazy month. So yeah, please let me know and go check that video out if you're interested, but let's just go into this video. So this month I ended up reading a total of 3 books. It just ended up being a really crazy month for me. The semester has really picked up in terms of workload, and I was exhausted. So it's only 3, but one of them was like 600 pages. So I read over 1,000 pages overall, but it was just a really chaotic month. So the first book that I read this month was Walk on Earth, a Stranger by Carson, and this is the first book in, I forget the name of the trilogy, but I have the physical book at home, but I checked out like the Kindle version from the library, so I read it on my Kindle. So yeah, it's about a girl who, it's during the gold rush in America, and she has this ability where she can sense gold in the ground, and one day she comes home and she finds that her parents have been brutally murdered, and she ends up getting her new like parent or guardian is her uncle, who she suspects is the one who actually murdered her parents. So she ends up running away to California with her friend, and I really like this. I liked kind of the historical element, especially during the gold rush. I wasn't like, I remember learning about it in maybe like grade 3 or grade 4, so like a lot of it was, it's like Oregon Trail type of stuff. I really liked it. I felt like the main character was very different from what we typically see in YA. She was very sure of herself, and she kind of disguises herself as a boy, and just kind of the dilemmas of, I like how it talked about how kind of the, especially during like this time in the 1900s, or I guess the early or late 1800s or whatever, I don't remember, but basically like how like she'll have an advantage being a girl in this situation, but she wouldn't have this advantage if she was a boy, and all this stuff, and the dilemmas of like all that. And I really liked it, like kind of the struggle and like gender roles especially, and how like all that stuff I thought was interesting. And how I liked in this book, she talks about how like, especially because they're going out like to California, like that like 1,000-mile whatever like adventure, and how like especially with like her period and all that and the struggles of keeping that. I like how it kind of discussed that aspect too, because it's really something that's not really discussed, and just kind of the struggles there. But I really like this. I feel like the side characters could have been more developed, but I am interested in continuing on with this series overall. So I would give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I feel like it was a really good start to this trilogy, and I really like the direction. I'm not really sure what else could be done, but I really liked it. So I grew attached to a lot of the characters in there. I did feel the side characters could have been more developed, but overall I really enjoyed this. It's really different. So if you are like a fan of historical fiction, this would be a good like book for you. It does have that historical ties with a little bit of fantasy, but overall I really like this. Next I then read It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. This is about a girl named Lily who ends up falling in love with this guy, and the story kind of flashed back between her diary entries of when she met her kind of first boyfriend, and kind of the 2 parallel storylines. But basically like a big part of this story is that Lily's father was really abusive to her mother, and she's like, I'm never gonna go down this path or whatever, and her boyfriend at the time, Atlas, kind of helped her kind of struggle with like go through all those struggles of dealing with an abusive father. He was never abusive to her, but with her mother, and she's like, I'm never going to be like my mother and be in that relationship. And then she kind of crossed paths with a guy named Riley, who is a very interesting guy. He is a neurosurgeon. He's very dedicated, and he ends up falling in love with her. And yeah, I'll just leave it as there because I don't want to give any spoilers about that, but I really liked it because it does raise the issue of domestic violence and how, like, I think the big issue, like, especially in here, Lily's like, how can my mother have stayed with him, like, with her father, even though he was so abusive to her? And it raises the question of why women stay, or even men stay with a spouse that's abusive to them. I really liked it. It does have trigger warnings for domestic violence and rape, so if you are sensitive to these issues, then maybe not read this or just be aware of it going in. But I really liked it. I could kind of predict what was going to happen, like the big turning point, I guess, in the middle of the book. But I really liked kind of how it showed both sides of domestic violence. Not necessarily like both sides, but like why women will like stay in those situations, which I thought was really important, especially because it's directed towards, like, I'd say this is more new adult, especially, but I think it's important for girls and boys to kind of understand the dynamics of that. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I did think some parts were really predictable, but I love the growth that we had with the characters, and you could see kind of both sides of the argument. So yeah, this one was really good. And then lastly, I then read Breath of Scandal by Sandra Brown. And this was my first Sandra Brown book that I've read. I know my mom and my aunts have read some of her novels, and this one, it's just under 600 pages, but the font is like really big. So yeah, but anyway, like, this is about a girl named Jade. It takes place in the 1970s, and it's about a girl named Jade who's like, she's had this boyfriend for many years. She lives in this very small town that's very, like, kind of poverty driven, and it's kind of run by this main family that owns a big plant, and they're very wealthy, and he, like, the dad has his thumb wrapped around, like, the police department wrapped around his finger, so his son, who's quite the troublemaker, can get away with doing that, like doing bad things and all that. So one day Jade's boyfriend kind of not gets in a fight, but he was defending Jade with this guy named Neil, whose father is the one that kind of runs the town. And so to get back at Jade's boyfriend, he kidnaps her essentially, and then she ends up getting gang raped, and which leads to a whole lot of issues within the town, and she kind of gets shunned because the police department, who kind of works for the Neil's like father, kind of just was like, she asked for it, she's just calling rape because she feels ashamed for what she did, even though she was kind of egging them on and all that. So she ends up leaving this town, and she comes back several years later to get her revenge. So I thought this was really interesting. It was very hard to read at times because the author does not hold back in terms of like the rape itself and then the aftermath and the problems with it. And so like I could only read this, like I had to read it in small increments because it was so detailed and it was really hard to get through. But I think it's really important now, especially like everything that's going on with like the presidency and all that, and just women's rights in general, and just kind of the rape culture that we've seemed to develop over the past few years. That's like always been there, but I think it's more prevalent now. I think it's really important, especially because this book was written in the early 90s, that it was kind of ahead of its time in terms of that. Yeah, but so this is not recommended towards like the younger audiences because it is language heavy, it's very graphic, and all that, but I really liked it. I like admired Jade's determinants and just kind of getting back at them, like, and how she was very calculated and she was very determined and she's very smart. And I really liked that and all that, and it was actually really good. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. And yeah, I was really impressed by this, and I look forward to many of Sandra Brown's book in the future. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what you felt about these books. And yeah, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and if you're new, subscribe. And yeah, I will see you next time. Bye, guys.